Testament views and how to fulfill all the prophecy in the New Testament. So if you read the book of Matthew, it's going to be pointing out how prophecy was fulfilled when you read the book of Matthew, okay? And then we see Mark's word is what we call straightway. What does the word straightway mean? Now, immediately, right? So that word means straightway. Now, what was his focus? Anybody remember what we had up there?
Servant.
Servant, as a servant. And what do their masters want their servants to do? Do everything fast, right now. You see that? And so his word was straightway. And then we see also, he presented Christ as a servant in order that the servant may do something right. Then we see Luke's key phrase was the Son of Man, or the Son or Man, because he was emphasizing his humanity. John's key word was believe, because it was difficult for men to believe that they could actually touch a man and they were actually touching God. I want you to picture that for a moment. A man walks on the scene and he claims to be Jesus. And he says, all you do is touch me, you'll be healed. And that when you touch me, you're actually touching God. That'd be pretty hard to believe, wouldn't it? I mean, if I said I was Jesus right now, and you touched me, you were touching God, you wouldn't believe it, would you? Of course you would. But imagine that. A man walks on the scene, he says, you touch me, you're touching God, the creator of the world. So John was all about convincing people that Jesus Christ was God. And so John's whole purpose was just that. And we see here that was to cause men to believe that Jesus was not just a king or a servant of a man. He intended to prove that this same man, servant, king was the very God that made the world. Then we see what we call the audience. Let's look at the audience. Now, when we know that Matthew wanted to point out that Jesus Christ was a king, he had to have a certain type of audience. Now, anybody know what kind of people were looking for a great mighty king to rescue them from Roman? The Jews. Matter of fact, many Jews today are still looking for Christ to come because he came first as how?
A man.
As a man and as a what? A lowly servant. You know, he washed the disciples' feet. He healed people. He was like a servant. He went around serving other people. That's all he did the whole time he was here. He never took a position of authority. He prayed and submitted himself unto the Father. He was in a position of a lowly servant. It says in Philippians 2 that he thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation and put on himself the form of a servant in the form of a man and became what? Okay? Alright, and so we see that here. So we look at this and we find that Matthew wrote to the Jews, and the Jews were looking for a king. Mark wrote to the Romans, and so he was, they were more of a master over their slaves. Romans had slaves, and many of the slaves were Jews, God's people, and so he wrote to them from the standpoint of a servant, so they could understand who God was, and therefore presented Christ as a servant to the Romans. And the Greeks were interested in humanity, the body and life and death. And so Luke wrote to the Greeks, presents Christ as the Son of Man. And then John, his audience was the whole what? The whole world. John 3:16, for whosoever. Right? For God so loved the world. So his audience was the whole entire world. He wanted people to see Christ as God so they might be saved. So we see that in the book of John was written that way. We also find what we call the emphasis and outstanding sections. Okay, let's take a look at that. Now I want you to think for a moment. What are you most interested in when you think about a king?
The crown.
Riches.
Okay, the crown. What else?
His power.
His power, right? I mean, all he has to do is say something, and the subjects obey. If they don't obey, what happens to them? They die. And it's usually not through lethal injection. They chop their heads off or something vile. It's an example, but if you don't obey, this is what happens. He's a man of great authority, right? So that's a king. And so when we look at this, we'll see that, and you got to remember, when the kings speak, everyone wants to listen. And therefore, Matthew emphasizes Christ as a king, okay, in the words of Christ. And so his sermons was based on the deeds Matthew emphasized the words of Christ, in particular his sermons. So when you look at, right now in the church main service, we're going over Matthew 5, which are called the what?
Yeah.
The Beatitudes. That was Christ's sermon on the mount as he spoke to the disciples and the multitude. So we're going over his sermon. So the most important thing about a king is what he declares. And so as he thought about writing about the king, Matthew focused on the words of Christ. Keep that in mind. Now the deeds of his servant are the most important. So Mark emphasizes the works of Christ. So Matthew emphasizes the words of Christ. Mark emphasizes the works of Christ, or the deeds of Christ, and such alike. Okay, you ready to follow that? And so we see that there. So he talks about his miracles. He presents Christ as a servant in a business like Roman citizens. And then also Luke, on the other hand, is a doctor. A doctor is more concerned about what? Life and what? Life and death, right? So what he wrote about mostly was the birth and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So when you read the book of Luke, you'll see very detailed points on the crucifixion of Christ. As he stood before Pontius Pilate and all those things, his birth. All those things are detailed. When we read the Christmas story, what do we turn? The book of what? Luke in chapter 2. So he detailed those things about Jesus Christ in that way. He was a doctor, okay? And then we find that Mark and John don't even mention Christ's birth. Why? Well, no one is interested in the genealogy of the birth of a servant, and as God, he needs no explanation. He's eternal. So they didn't even focus on the birth and death of Jesus Christ because of that very reason. When you get to the book of John, you look at the end, it doesn't mention anything about Christ's crucifixion. Okay? And it's for those very reasons. Now, we look at this, we'll see that, however, Mark and Luke, however, do detail his birth because one is very interested in the birth of a king and the birth of a man. So they focus on that. And so finally, John's emphasis is on Christ's deity, and the most outstanding section of John which Christ claims to be God either in his own words or in his miracles. And so John mentions only a few miracles. There are over 40 miracles performed, but in the book of John they only focus on about 7. Because they wanted to show only the miracles that show that he was God. That was his focus, to make sure that people understood that Jesus was God so that all men might be saved. Let's go and look at some basic characteristics. Okay? And as we look at this, we'll see here that John is basically a spiritual book. His purpose is to evangelize the whole entire world, okay? And he calls man to believe. That's the focus of John. Matter of fact, we give out the fruit that remains. What 2 books are in the fruit that remains?
Romans.
The book of Romans and the book of John. Let me explain what that means. The book of John tells you who God is, or who Jesus is, and the book of Romans tells you who you are. And so you put those 2 books together, and you can have a relationship with God. Those are 2 more important. Now, the book of John is the easiest book to read. It's like on the 3rd grade level. That's another reason why we give that book out. Okay? So those books are very, very important. Okay, as we look at that. And so John is a spiritual book. It focuses on a relationship with God. Its purpose is to evangelize the world. It calls men to believe. The other 3 Gospels are only historical. They're only historical. They just record the things of God. That's it. They're not primarily evangelical. Okay? And so it's very important that we understand that. So their main objective is to document the events of Christ's life. Now, the other points we want to make about what John records is this. John records less about the life of Christ than do the other Gospels. So his is less about the life of Christ itself. John records fewer movements of Jesus, and the actual events he discusses are much more limited. John is more concerned with who Jesus is and what Jesus did. John seeks to prove that Jesus is God himself and he is Israel's Messiah. That's what he seeks out to prove. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and talk about some key words as we look at this. We're going to sum Matthew, Mark, and Luke up into a word that's called synoptics. Anybody know what the word synoptics means? Break that word apart into 2 words. You got sin, S-I-N. Okay. What does that word sound like? Sin. Synonymous, right? And what does that word mean?
Combine.
Okay, the word sin, S-Y-N.
And sin together.
Yeah, together, right. Like synthesis, it means to bring things together. Synthesize or synthesis reaction, you put 2 chemicals together, you produce a product. Okay, synthesis or sin, it means together or alike. What does optic mean? Optic. It means to see. Okay? So put those 2 words together and tell me what you think they mean.
See together.
That's it. You got Matthew, Mark,